Hello everybody, I'm Barbara Ann. Welcome back to my channel, Straight Out of Context. We are going to pick up right where we left off yesterday about the March 13th, 1926 sudden disappearance of my great uncle, Wilfred Le Mere. This is the second born son out of my grandfather and him and his 5 brothers. My grandfather was the youngest out of the 5. This is the second born. He comes up missing March 13th, 1926 with his friend Lawrence Flavin, who was also 9 years old at the time, going 3 blocks away to Detroit Cinema. And they never end up coming back home. They end up disappeared completely. So yesterday I started going over some of the articles with the Associated Press, our repeat articles. So I don't want to get too into detail about repeat articles out of the 150 here. But of course, a lot of it is the same information. It's just ran in a different city, different newspaper, sometimes a different state. So this one is Monday, March 22nd, 1926, the Battle Creek Enquirer, Battle Creek, Michigan, page 1. Think missing Detroit boys are still living. So they definitely thought that they were still living. And the reason why is because Selfridge Air Base had put planes in the air. And they actually did this more than once. Put planes over Belle Isle and all up and down the Detroit River looking for signs of the boys or their possible bodies to recover them, which they found nothing. Now, March 13th of 1926, for 16 days consecutively, they searched and searched and searched. The Michigan State Police, the Detroit Police, the Harbor Masters, the Coast Guard. Then there was also the Windsor Police, the Ontario Provincial Police, and then we had Selfridge Air Base, but we also had divers who actually dived in the Detroit River in March, mid-March, in winter, here in Michigan in 1926, looking to see if they could find or recover the boys, and they didn't. They did not find any evidence whatsoever for 16 days that the boys were anywhere near the river. So this one is the Saginaw News, Saginaw, Michigan, page 3, Monday, March 22nd, 1926. No trace of boys found by planes. Flyers search Belle Isle from air Sunday without any avail. Belief that Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere, 2 9-year-old Detroit missing boys for a week, still being alive, was strengthened Monday after an airplane had flown around Belle Isle Sunday and vicinity and found no trace of the bodies of the pair at all. It says the 2 boys set out a week ago Saturday for a motion picture show, but companions said that they possibly started for Belle Isle. This gave rise to the belief that the 2 might have drowned. The boys have been reported during the last week as having been seen in Jackson, Saginaw, Flint, Kalamazoo, Birmingham, but no actual trace of the boys have been found. The airplane which sought to trace out the boys of the canals of Belle Isle and around the Detroit River was piloted by Lieutenant J.J. Williams of Selfridge Air Base and carried Lieutenant Luther Smith as an observer. The flight was arranged at the request of Sergeant Donald B. Leonard of the State Police, who has been assigned the case by Allen Strait, Commissioner of Public Safety. But I also want to show you something really, really interesting here, because if you see there's a Schaefer's ad here for fountain pen with the little holder and the inkwell. I think this is kind of interesting, this ad right here. Some of them are just really interesting, so I wanted to read that. But here we got the Niles Daily Star, Niles, Michigan, page 1, Monday, March 22nd, 1926. Search for Detroit lads nationwide. And it says that the state police announced that they are circulating the boys' descriptions, that they would be sent from Lansing to every city and town in the country. This action followed strengthening the belief Sunday that the boys are still alive. At the request of Detective Sergeant Donald Leonard, you can't see because there's a fold in the paper, police, an airplane from Selfridge Airfield was sent out over Belle Isle as observation, covering 4 miles of the Detroit River, but found no trace of the boys' bodies. Saturday's reports that they had been in the vicinity of Saginaw or Bay City fell through when the police departments of both cities announced that no trace of the pair after a very thorough search. And if you see this article, that's why I was having a hard time reading it, because if you see here, the paper had actually been folded and kind of messed up. And some of these are hard to read. This one's the Windsor Star. Page 18, March 22nd, 1926. 2 boys still gone. Detroit lads feared dead. No clue in the river. And I want to show you. Look at the ad. Look at the Valentino ad. But that's largely still just the same information about the boys. Missing boys in Port Huron. The Lansing State Journal, Lansing, Michigan, page 5, Tuesday, March 23rd, 1926. Sarnia, Canada. Woman claims she saw Detroit youths in the Tunnel City. It was revealed here Monday that Wilfred Le Mere, a 9-year-old boy who, with Lawrence Flavin, also 9, had been missing 10 days, is Miss Le Mere's son by a former marriage. The boy's father is William Peterson of Wakeno, Wisconsin, who was divorced by his wife about 8 years ago. Another clue to the whereabouts of the 2 boys was being investigated Monday. A letter has been received from a Mrs. Rogers of Sarnia, Ontario, saying that she saw the boys in Port Huron, Michigan, several days ago. The letter was dated March 17th. The police planned to send men to Sarnia Monday to interview Mrs. Rogers. She wrote that she had spoken to the boys, and she had received evasive answers. That ended up not being true either. Hope fades for rescue of family. The Herald Palladium, Benton Harbor, Michigan, page 4, Tuesday, March 23rd, 1926. No trace found of missing Detroiters who attempted to cross ice. No trace of James Phipps and his wife and 4 children have been found by a rescue party which went to Kelly Island, Middle Island, after it had been reported signal fires were seen on the island. Phipps and his family were lost in a blizzard March 1 while crossing from Pelsey Island to Leamington, Ontario by automobile. Believe boys live. Belief that Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere, the 9-year-old Detroit missing boys for a week, are still alive, strengthened after airplane. And then it goes on to talk about the boys and how they were lost also, which is really bizarre because it turns out that man, his wife, and 4 kids were fine. I don't know why they were trying to cross the ice, because from my understanding now, the Detroit River never fully freezes over. It's a running river that currently is always going. And there's so many barges that come up and down the St. Clair River, the Detroit River, constantly huge barges all day long. And so here, even when it gets to be freezing, I think I've only one time witnessed the St. Clair River actually freeze, and it's kind of attached to the Detroit River. So Lake Erie and Lake Huron are inadvertently attached to each other. There's Lake St. Clair, which is in the middle, but they're connected by the St. Clair River to Lake St. Clair, and Lake St. Clair, the Detroit River, to Lake Erie. So that's how that goes. But they largely don't freeze over. So I don't know if that's true in 1926 or not. But I'm assuming parts of it probably did freeze over. Not solid enough to try to cross it, though. It says this one here, the Niles Daily Star, March 25th, 1926, page 1. Detroit police continue search for missing boys. The Atlanta Constitution, Atlanta, Georgia, page 6, March 25th, 1926. Missing Detroit lads are sought by police. And it goes on to say the same thing about how they're looking for the boys. They're looking for the boys, and they haven't been able to find them. And that's Atlanta, Georgia. This one here is the Battle Creek Inquirer, March 25th, 1926. Looking through today's news. Warning Detroit parents to teach their children to avoid strangers and to take a lesson from the disappearance of Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere. Reverend R.E. Charles, Assistant Rector of St. John's Church, Woodward Avenue, and High Street, urged capital punishment as a crime deterrent and as a barrier against the influx of degenerates who says, find Michigan a haven. Perhaps the parents of Detroit do not know it, said Reverend Charles. But due to the fact that Detroit and Michigan are not protected by capital punishment, the city has become a veritable beehive of criminals. An unidentified man whom officers believe to be William Hughes, a junk gatherer, was instantly unalived yesterday afternoon when struck. Man questioned in search for two boys. This is where everything starts to turn. Windsor Star, Windsor, Ontario, page 14, March 25th, 1926. March 25th, Paul Harrington, 22, of 5042 Brush Street, was questioned today in an effort to find clues to the whereabouts of Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere missing boys. Harrington is said to have been the man who visited Thomas Flavin and the Le Mere home and professed to know where the sons were. He's the guy that was impersonating a state police officer. He had a Michigan state officer badge with a number and everything. Hope in search of missing boys revived. Grand Rapids Press, Grand Rapids, Michigan, page 2, March 26, 1926. It says hope was revived Thursday in the search for Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere, two 9-year-old boys who have been missing since March 13th. When it was learned today they were seen in a Woodward Avenue restaurant on the night of the day they disappeared. Several witnesses have been found to have seen the boys in the restaurant at 9:30 March 13th, several hours after they left home. The lads were with two older boys who sell newspapers near the restaurant. These two boys have not been since found, and the police now believe the four went on a hike, living on their wits and traveling in boxcars. Absolutely absurd. That is completely invented. None of that ended up being true. The Windsor Star, page 13th, Friday, March 26, 1926. Ransom demanded for Flavin boy, Detroit, Michigan. A demand for $8,000 ransom was sent to the father of Lawrence Flavin, one of the two missing Detroit boys. It was revealed today. Following the rearrest of Paul Harrington, the man they had just questioned, the man who ended up coming to their house, my great-grandmother's house, and pretending to be a state police officer. You know, talk about audacity. Hope still held for two missing boys, the border city, Star, Windsor, Ontario. Now this just blew my mind. The Detroit Free Press, Detroit, Michigan, page 1, main page, Saturday, March 27th, 1926. Abducted boy found here. His captor flees. This 11-year-old little boy was saved by these two officers. Yep, and I'm gonna read that. That was the, if you see here, that's the front page of the Detroit Free Press. This is where I blew up the article, but I had to transcribe it because this actually is continued on another page, and I can show you that. The Detroit Free Press. This is continued on page 2. Kidnapped youth is rescued here. Abducted boy found here. His captor flees. Patrolman Pat Hogan and John Lambert lad. Patrolman Ben Waltowitz. Indiana lad's plight strengthens. Idea. Moron band holds two missing Detroit boys. Impetus was given to the theory that Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere were connected and are being held captive by degenerates with detention. Late Friday afternoon of John Lambert lad, 11 years old, of Marion, Indiana, who, when questioned by police at police headquarters, said he had been kidnapped while on his way home from school Thursday afternoon by a Greek man who brought him to Detroit. He said that he and his captor arrived late Friday afternoon. His abductor escaped. Patrolman Ben Waltowitz and Patrick Hogan brought the boy to Central Station after questioning him at a restaurant at Adams and Brush Streets. Brush Street is where Paul Harrington was said to have lived. We first noticed the boy walking, and then this is continued on the second page, down the street and talking over his shoulder to a man who appeared to be a Greek man, said Patrolman Hogan. The boy then stopped, and the man reached in his pocket and gave him some money. The boy then walked into the restaurant. We thought this suspicious and followed. The man walked hastily on, not stopping in the restaurant. At first, we thought the boy resembled Lawrence Flavin, and then we asked him his name, and that's when he told us the story of the kidnapping. The man ran and made his escape. So they decided across the street when they saw this happening, they decided to follow the boy in the restaurant and not follow the man instead. I was coming home from school late yesterday afternoon when I was approached by a man about a half a block away from my house, the boy told police. He spoke to me in a loud voice and told me I must go with him. If I refused, he told me he was going to throw me in the automobile anyway. And then he did, and drove to the Interburban station. I'm not sure what an Interburban station is. Is that a gas station of some type in 1926? I don't know. You guys let me know. Interurban station at Marion, and bought 2 tickets. Threatened boy's life. He didn't tell me where he was taking me, and he threatened to cut off my throat or my head if I yelled for help. We rode all night, changing cars once. We got into Detroit late this afternoon, and I was very hungry. He told me to walk in front of him and that he would get me something to eat. He gave me 15 cents, and that's the last I saw of him. Police are searching the city for the man believed, and if captured, he may throw important light on the disappearance of the Flavin and Le Mere boys. The story told by the youth took several different turns from the course of questioning. It was finally determined, however, that the youth gave his name as John Lambert Basher, who was in reality John Lambert Ladd with 2 D's. But he had been using the surname of his stepfather, George Basher, an iron worker at Marion, Indiana, although the lad is 11 years old, and he had never gone beyond the 1st grade at school because of the fact he lived on a Montana ranch during the major part of his school age. The youth rebels at the idea of returning home to his stepfather, stating that Basher frequently beats him. When found, the boy wore a gray aviator cap with brown lining boots, checkered pants, a gray overcoat, tan shoes, black stockings, and a gray sweater. The boy is 4 foot 5 inches tall, weighs between 65 and 70 pounds, and has light hair and brown eyes. According to the police, he is nearly a perfect image of the missing Flavin lad, but the 2 birthmarks on the forearm are missing. City thoroughly combed. Police have combed citywide Detroit dives where notorious eccentrics and known perverts gather on the chance that Wilfred Le Mere and Lawrence Flavin might have been held prisoners. Their efforts are now being directed towards the activities of certain pseudo-religious cults that have known to include debasing orgies and dangerous practices in their weird rituals. If this investigation proves fruitless, the police announced, the theory of kidnapping probably will be abandoned, and so far as Detroit is concerned. Meanwhile, reinforcements have been added to those already doing sentry duty along the riverfront. The lookout is being conducted on both sides of the river from Belle Isle to Grosse Ile in the hope that the boys may have drowned and that their bodies will be recovered. Thomas D. Flavin, father of Lawrence, said yesterday he was still hopeful. The boys will be found alive. Although he gave no reason for this belief, he places more credence in it at this time than any other time since his anxious vigil began more than 2 weeks ago. The motive of revenge was first thought plausible with the receipt of a threatening letter to Mrs. Le Mere, my great-grandmother, mother of Willard, now is scouted by local and state detectives as a work of a crank. The mysterious Herbert Smith, who had demanded that money be placed in a registered letter at the Windsor post office, said that he would hang the boys, is now to have believed to have been an attempt to extort money from the boys' parents. A dummy letter addressed to Smith remains uncalled for at the post office. Admit ransom letter, re-arrest of Paul Harrington, alias Larry O'Neill, more than a week ago, visited the Thomas D. Flavin and the Le Mere home in guise of a policeman, a state policeman at that, resulted in a confession that he was the author of a note to the parents that demanded $8,000 ransom. Harrington first was arrested a week ago. He was released after questioning by police. He was then re-arrested as an eccentric with a penchant for uniforms. State police and Flavin still hold some belief that he can throw any light on the disappearance of the boys, but are holding him for possible assistance to authorities. Police activities have resulted in the detention and examination of 5 degenerates in the past 4 days. 4 were released after, meaning they had exhausted everything they could possibly do to try to find my great uncle and his friend. But this guy, Paul Harrington, has been inserting himself in this from the very beginning, coming to the homes, pretending to be a Michigan State police officer, writing letters demanding $8,000, writing another letter saying that he's going to harm the boys and that he has them if he doesn't get what he wants. And then he's arrested, he's released, he's rearrested. It's mind-boggling. And that 11-year-old boy who's kidnapped from Indiana gets found on Brush Street. Paul Harrington lives on Brush Street. You cannot tell me that that is just a coincidence. This one is the Windsor Star, Windsor, Ontario, Canada, Saturday, March 27th, 1926. Degenerates blamed for holding boys. This is where they started looking at the idea of a kidnapping with this Paul Harrington. And the fact that the theory was now that they were probably kidnapped, and that John Lambert Ladd, 11 years old, of Marion, Indiana, had been kidnapped from Marion, Indiana, and brought to Detroit, to Brush Street, by a man. And they never did find that man who took that boy, but he disappeared. And I often wonder, was that Paul Harrington? Because Paul Harrington wasn't arrested until later after that. So it's just, I don't know. It's bizarre to me that this man did all this. Boy kidnapped, he claims to police. Same thing. Now this one, the Herald Palladium, Benton Harbor, Michigan, page 8, Saturday, March 27th. Missing boy's mother collapses. Mrs. William Le Mere, mother of 9-year-old Wilfred Le Mere, my great-grandmother, who disappeared with Lawrence Flavin 14 days ago, collapsed last night upon her return home from church services. She has been confined to her bed all day. Police have found no clues to the whereabouts of the missing boys. A general appeal to railroad workers and people all over the country to examine boxcars in hopes of finding the boys was made today by Alan Strait, Commissioner of Public Safety of Michigan. This one is largely the same thing. Mother of missing boy takes to bed. Kidnapped boy found near Detroit. That's about the same boy who was found. Mother of lost boy collapses. That's Battle Creek Inquirer. That's about my great-grandmother collapsing from grief and just uncertainty of not knowing where her 9-year-old son is. Mother of missing child collapses. There's this one. So a lot of these are repeated. I just wanted to show. That was the Lansing State Journal. This is the Cincinnati Enquirer, Cincinnati, Ohio, March 27th. Indiana boy victim. About the same boy being found and saved in Detroit, and about how my great uncle and his friend were missing. Now, this one is the Niles Daily Star, Monday, March 29th, 1926. Impersonated state police to face court. Paul Harrington, 22 years old, held by police investigating the disappearance of 2 9-year-old boys, Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere, will be charged with impersonating a state police officer. It was learned today Harrington is said to have represented himself to the boys' parents as a state policeman and to have admitted knowledge of an $8,000 ransom letter received by Thomas D. Flavin. Police are also holding Benton Cobb, C-O-B-B, 21, as an acquaintance and a friend of Harrington's. So if you want to know how 2 boys are taken at one time, it's because 2 men are taking 2 boys at one time, in my opinion. Second arrest made in case of missing youths. Lansing State Journal, page 11. Monday, March 29th, 1926. And it says here about how The latest arrest involves Benton Cobb, 20, friend of Paul Harrington, 22, who was taken into custody last week after he presented himself as a state police officer, going to the homes of the two missing boys to ease the parents' minds and writing a ransom note. Authorities believe Cobb may be able to explain how Harrington came into possession of the state police uniform and the badge with the number, which he wore when he visited the parents of the two boys. Harrington was at first released following his statement, and then he had a weakness for uniforms and was rearrested. He is held for further examination. Mothers of the missing boys are in a state of virtual collapse at their homes here. Both are in constant receipt of reports of missing boys and have refused to abandon hope for their sons and that they have not come to a tragic end. Meanwhile, fathers of the missing pair are cooperating with police in constant searches of Detroit and vicinity and are directing a statewide hunt by cooperating with the police departments. Another boy goes missing. Detroit, March 29th, 1926. 13-year-old Abraham Paul today was added to the growing list of missing Detroit boys. He disappeared from his home Saturday. His mother, Mrs. William Paul, believes he may have been enticed from home by somebody else and is maybe now afraid to return. The Detroit Free Press, page 1, Monday, March 29th, 1926. Second arrest made in search for two boys. And my great uncle is him, Wilfred Le Mere. This is Wilfred Le Mere, my grandfather's brother. And then this is Lawrence Flavin right here. And then, of course, here you can see where it was on the front page. And it goes on to talk about how they rearrested Paul Harrington and Benton Cobb. It turns out the only thing they could charge Paul Harrington with was impersonating a police officer. So it goes on. This one is also continued. New arrest in search of boys. Second youth held. Pair arrested in probe of missing boys. The Windsor Star. March 29th, and it talks about the same thing about Benton Cobb being arrested as well as Paul Harrington. More arrests in hunt for two boys. Detroit boys may be in Muncie, Indiana, police say. And that's the Muncie Evening Press, Muncie, Indiana, page 5. Another tie to Indiana. There's already one boy that was kidnapped and saved in Detroit that was taken from Marion, Indiana. And this is Muncie. Muncie police have been asked to aid in the search for two 9-year-old boys who left their homes in Detroit, Michigan on the afternoon of March 13th and have not yet returned. A Detroit police bulletin, which police received here Tuesday, gave a description of the boys, requesting that the Muncie Department to cooperate with the Detroit authorities. The boys, Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere, are slightly over 4 feet in height and each has light brown hair. Muncie, Indiana. And then this is the Herald Press, St. Joseph, Michigan, Tuesday, March 30th, 1926. More arrests in hunt for boys. This one says, suspect is set free. The Windsor Star, March 30th, 1926. After 2 hours questioning of Benton Cobb, 21-year-old friend of Ferndale, meaning Benton Cobb is from Ferndale, by Sergeant Donald Leonard of the State Police last night at the Ferndale Police Station, the second man to have been taken into custody in connection with the disappearance of Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere, the two missing Detroit boys, was released. He had been held at the Ferndale station since Sunday night when arrested by Leonard practically at his own behest. Cobb, an employee of Ford Motor Company and an acquaintance of Paul Harrington, alias Larry O'Neill, held on the charge of impersonating a state police officer, resulted in alleged attempt to convince the parents that he knew where the children were at and could get them back, declared that Harrington had made frequent visits at his lodgings at 541 West Troy Avenue, Ferndale. At times, Cobb said Harrington procured money from him at the pretense of aiding some woman. Picture thought to be lost boy's clue. And that's the Lansing State Journal, how they went to a special screening of a movie picture featuring a dog as the chief actor and was given Monday for Sergeant Donald Leonard and Detective Stanley Ferguson of the state police and Thomas D. Flavin in the hope that the picture might afford them a clue in the search for 9-year-olds Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere, missing more than 2 weeks. The picture was one of which the boys had talked about seeing for days. It was thought that the picture might afford some suggestion, which the boys adopted, meaning that the movie might have given them some idea that ended up causing them to do it and caused their demise. No trace of the lads had been found Tuesday, although the state police and Detroit police continued the search. And the police never thought to go 3 blocks away to the Detroit cinema and speak to people who attended the movie and that worked there. That is beyond me. But then they thought that the river would be the first place to start. This one says 2 boys are still missing. The South Bend Tribune, South Bend, Indiana. Now, this is where it gets heartbreaking for me, because knowing that this is my family. The Detroit Free Press, page 1, Wednesday, March 31st, 1929. Letter admits to killing boys. Mother of Wilfred Le Mere, my great-grandmother, gets missive from a man, supposed moron. Mrs. William Le Mere, mother of Wilfred Le Mere, with whom Lawrence Flavin disappeared March 13th and is now believed by police to have been drowned in the Detroit River or taken off of Belle Isle yesterday, received a letter from a man. Now, this was just the day before that, talking about the picture. Now, the overnight, that same day to this, my great-grandmother received a letter from a man believed to be a maniac who claims that he is a professional killer of boys and very young women. The letter, which was made no threats against the families of the 2 missing boys and appears the work of a degenerate, is printed in ink with words badly spelled. It says the writer killed little Max Ernest and also claims to have murdered a Chicago boy in 1908. Believed the work of a moron. The writer of the anonymous letter declared that he was a man who cuts up children and slashes women, and that he had killed many, many, many in this manner. The death of Max Ernest created a sensation in Detroit about 5 years ago. Mrs. Sarah Lewin, I believe it's very hard to see that. I'm sorry if I'm starting on my, because it's very hard to see some of these. Miss Sarah Lewin, who is said to have quarreled with the boy's father over business matters, was accused of the crime and after a sensational trial was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. The letter is believed by police to be the work of a moron who has taken delight in the suffering of others. Continued on page 2, column 6. And that continuation goes on here. Writer says that he slew boys. Police think the boys drowned. It talks about how Paul Harrington is being held for trial, 22 years old, of 5042 Brush Street, recently rearrested on charges with impersonating a state police officer yesterday, waived examination when arraigned on the charge before Judge Thomas M. Cotter of the Recorder's Court. Harrington's bail was fixed at $6,000, I believe that says, with one surety, in default of which it was remanded to the county jail to await trial. Benton Cobb, 20-year-old Ferndale friend of Harrington's, was released from custody. That's the continuation of that one. Now, this is where I don't even know what to think with all of this whole rabbit hole, but the Sault Star, the Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Canada, page 1, Wednesday, March 31st, 1926. Noose alone will stop crime wave. Noose alone will stop crime wave. Detroit pastor says hordes flock to Detroit to save their necks. 1926. As a warning to Detroit parents to teach their children to avoid strangers and to take a lesson from the disappearance of Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere. He talks about how capital punishment is a crime deterrent and a barrier against the influx of degenerates who, he says, finds Michigan a haven for their criminal activity. And that perhaps our policemen are constantly being shut down. Our children, both boys and girls, are being subjected to the most degrading practices of degenerates almost on the daily. There is a new announcement of the torture of some parents are undergoing through when they are missing a boy or girl. This stuff should be stopped, and it should not be too severe. Meanwhile, the various theories regarding the disappearance of Lawrence and Willard have simmered down until now. Only two ideas are left for the police to work on. These are that the boys were kidnapped and are being held by degenerates for ransom, or that they drowned in the Detroit River. Killer writes to kin of missing boys. Killer writes to kin of missing boys. That's the Lansing State Journal. The Niles Daily Star. Convinced of all theories have been advanced in connection with the disappearance of two 9-year-old playmates. The only tenable ones are drowning and abduction. City police say today they are beginning a roundup of suspects. 3 weeks later. Fake letter sent to boys' parents. Now, they don't know if this is fake or not. I mean, they have absolutely no idea if this is a fake letter or not. They don't know if it was somebody else. Still seek missing boys. This is Chillicothe, Missouri. Chillicothe Constitution, Chillicothe, Missouri, page 18, Thursday, April 1st, 1926. Seek missing boys. Chief of Police this morning received a circular from the Detroit, Michigan Police Department giving the description of Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere, two boys who are missing from their homes in that city. The local officers were asked to keep watch for the missing boys. And it gives their description. This is the Chillicothe Constitution ran this ad. Police to Drag River Friday. Expect to recover bodies of two missing boys following new clue. Hope to solve a mystery. This is where people started to insert themselves again. And it says here that the Detroit River may hold the secret to the disappearance of the boys. The Detroit Police and the Harbor Master's Department believe it does, and they are making feverish preparations to prove their contention. They hope before nightfall that they can prove that they are right and that they will have solved the sensational mystery. Now, they had already dragged the river a bunch of times in the first 16 days. I know that, knowing what I know in hindsight. But it says here that their base belief came from a brand new clue that the boys were drowned off of Belle Isle on information from a source. This has furnished the most reliable clue since the boys were first reported missing. The reliable information came from Mr. and Mrs. William Went of 4876 Maxwell Avenue, who said they saw one of the boys fall in the river and the other boy pulled him out. On the strength of Went's statement, the search will begin early today on the South Shore near the center of the island. It talks about letter being 2 weeks old at the hands of police. This is something that they hadn't. There was a whole nother letter written by a supposed killer given to police, and the police did not release that information until then. But this couple says that this clue was due to the fact that Mr. and Mrs. Went drove over the bridge to Belle Isle, drove around Belle Isle, just enjoying their afternoon, and they saw two boys. They saw one boy trip and fall in the river and the other boy pull him out, and they just kept going. Turns out that none of this was true either. None of this. Absolutely not a single thing of this was true. And that to me is just devastating, because seeing the articles about my great-grandmother collapsing in her bed and going to church and going to her priest and being confined to bed and holding a state vigil over and over, it's just mind-boggling. So these are about them planning to drag the river again, The Windsor Star, the Lansing State Journal, the Herald Palladium all ran the same articles. River dragged for boys. This is Birmingham News, Birmingham, Alabama, Saturday, April 3rd, 1926. Police dragged the Detroit River. Looking for them. South Bend Tribune, same thing. Hunt for Boys in Water, Detroit. They run an article about their names. The Palm Beach Post, West Palm Beach, Florida, page 26, Sunday, April 4th, 1926. So West Palm Beach, Florida. This one is the Detroit Free Press, page 2, Thursday, April 8th, 1926. Divers search for boys fail. Discover terrific current, which may have swept the bodies downriver. Failure of Thomas Pouliot. I'm not sure how he would say that. If you know, let me know. Diver. To locate the bodies of Wilfred Le Mere and Lawrence Flavin near the boat landing of the head of Belle Isle, and his discovery of the strength of the current in the channel nearby was strengthened. The police believe that the missing boys may have drowned and their bodies have been swept downriver. The divers' search was a result of a clue furnished by Mr. and Mrs. William F. Went. And it goes on about how they said they saw the boys on Belle Isle when they were driving. And you know what is so bizarre to me is you see two 9-year-old boys winter in Michigan on Belle Isle. That begs the question, why did you not stop? If you saw a boy falling and the other boy pull him out, why didn't you stop and offer them a ride home? Why didn't you stop and ask where their parents were? And you just kept driving? We now know that that's not true. It never happened. They never saw them. Or if they did see two little boys, it was not my uncle and it was not Lawrence. So it just talks about how this diver here dived inside of the Detroit River looking for their bodies to recover them, and he found nothing. And this is not the only time divers went in the Detroit River in the middle of winter and the end of winter trying to find them. So this one is Detroit Free Press, April 10th, 1926, page 12. Fake officer is given 1 year. Paul Harrington, 22 years old. The fake state police officer in the case of Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere missing boys was sentenced to serve 6 months to 1 year House of Correction. And that was it, following the disappearance. Also writing the letter, all of it. He also lied, saying that he saw the pair in Kalamazoo. He was rearrested 2 weeks later following the investigation. He never said what his motive was. He only had been allied to the anxiety of the parents. Police said, however, the desire for publicity may have been a part to play for Harrington. Harrington lives at 5042 Brush Street. He pled guilty when arraigned in court. Police are convinced he knows nothing of the whereabouts of the boys, and I think he knew everything. I think he may have been connected to the other 11-year-old boy who had been found on Brush Street. And then these are just more articles about how he was sentenced to only 1 year. That's all they could give him for impersonating an officer. Impersonated officers, missing boys believed deceased. Three more boys vanish. April 19th. Windsor Star. It says the two vanished without a trace. And then 3 more boys came up missing. Walter Rovell of 6431 Otis Avenue. Lester Horvey, 10323 Greenlee Avenue. And Arthur A. McElroy, 8053 Chamberlain Avenue, have not been seen since the afternoon of April 15th, when they left home with 45 cents. His father, Alexander, thinks they may have gone shooting Indians in the woods. Lester dropped from sight April 16th and Walter the following day. No trace have been found of any of the 3 boys. 2 more Detroit boys missing from home. Now this is where I'm going to take you towards the conclusion of this. The Windsor Star, page 3, May 6th, 1926. This is almost 2 months later, March 13th, April, May 6th of 1926. Boy's body found in river at Amherstburg. which I believe is on the Canadian side, believed to be that of Detroit lad missing 2 months. Police authorities in Amherstburg believe that the body has been found floating in the Detroit River today was one of 2 missing Detroit boys that may have drowned last March. The boys were Lawrence Flavin and Wilfred Le Mere. Both were 9 years old. The body was picked up at Livingstone Channel opposite of Amherstburg at noon. It was clad in a gray overcoat, and it was in one of the pockets reposed a package of Cracker Jack, a confection popular in juvenile circles. The boy's hair was light brown in color. Frank Planty and Clarence Gibb discovered the body. They are employed at the Dunbar Dredging Company, while Dr. W. Fred Park, coroner, was making arrangements to hold an investigation. It was found necessary the body be taken to the undertaking rooms of the Kent Furniture Company nearby. The 2 boys disappeared mysteriously on Saturday, March 13th. In Detroit. At first, the Detroit police believed that they had been kidnapped and that the city was combed for suspects. That was not true. At first, they thought that they had drowned. 2 of whom gathered in questioning, held for some time, later released, Paul Harrington and Benton Cobb. All clues of this nature failing, the police came to the conclusion that the boys must have just fallen into the river while playing on the shores of Belle Isle, and divers were employed without success in an attempt to recover their bodies immediately. A friend of the Flavin family visited Amherstburg this afternoon, but failed to identify the body as that of either Flavin or the Le Mere boy. Body found near iceberg floating, identified. And it says, definite assurance that the body of 11-year-old boy found floating in the Livingston Channel in Amherstburg yesterday is that of Joseph Charnosky, 4854 Joseph Campow Avenue, and not that of Wilfred Le Mere or Lawrence Flavin of Detroit. Was given last night when Mrs. Charnosky identified the remains of Mr. Charnosky identified the remains of his son. He was last seen alive on the morning of March 12th, the day before my uncle and his friend come up missing. His disappearance remains a mystery. It wasn't either one of the boys. It was a different boy. Boy's body found. That's the Waterloo Region Record, Kirchner, Ontario, Canada. Missing boy's body is found. Now that's May 6th. This is now May 10th, 4 days later. The Battle Creek Inquirer, Times Herald, which is here in Port Huron, page 1. Missing boy's body found. Monday, May 10th, 1926. Missing boy's body found in Detroit River. The body of Lawrence Flavin, 9-year-old who disappeared 2 months ago with his playmate Wilfred Le Mere, was found floating today in the Detroit River. 4 days after, another 11-year-old was found floating in the Detroit River. Identification was made by the boy's mother, Mrs. Thomas Flavin, by means of a house key on a ring that he had in his trouser pocket. No trace has been found of the Le Mere boy with whom Lawrence was with and started out on a Saturday afternoon, ostensibly to attend a neighborhood moving picture theater. Mrs. William Le Mere said that she was convinced her son may have also drowned. Mrs. Flavin declared Lawrence should not be buried until Willard's body had also been recovered. We know now that they must have died together. They will be buried together, the mother said. When the boys failed to return home, a search was instituted internationally for them at Belle Isle, Canada, and throughout Detroit, where they had told friends they might have gone to Belle Isle. The only trace of them at this island was a report that a small boy had been seen to fall in the river. The man who reported the happening said that he had not thought necessary the boys were harmed, since he presumed the elder person accompanying them was with them. Boxcar and railroad yards in Michigan, towns, and border cities were searched for the boys in the belief that they had set out on an adventure and might have tried to beat their way by freight train and, quote, somewhere to the west. Several reports of the boys had been seen in Durham, Flint, Jackson, Kalamazoo, Port Huron, Canada, and when traced down, were found to be groundless. It says Paul E. Harrington of Detroit is serving a jail term of 1 year for impersonating a state officer in connection with the search of the boys. He went to the Flavin and Le Mere homes dressed as a state policeman and told both families that the boys were in Jackson and that he can help find them. Later, he admitted to the police that this was a hoax. He also admitted to writing the letter, and they couldn't, one of the letters and one of the ransom letters. So that's unfortunate. So they did, Flavin boy's body is found, Lansing State Journal, the Grand Rapids Press, Windsor Star, Lawrence Flavin is found, and this is the one I want to show you, Detroit Free Press, page 8, Tuesday, May 11th, 1926. River yields body of Flavin boy, missing 2 months. This is Lawrence Flavin. This is his mother. This is my grandfather's mother. This is Delina Marie La Rocque, Delina Le Mere. She is Willard's mother. They go to the morgue together. The body is so decomposed they cannot identify it. And what ends up happening is they identify it by a little ring with a house key that he had on him. They found no money. So the dollar that he had and the 20 cents Willard had was gone. No, nothing else. Just a simple house key. They couldn't even make an identification based on the clothing. Boy hunt ends at river. The Gazette, Montreal, Quebec, Canada, page 14, Tuesday, May 11th. Boy hunt ends at river. And then this is now going 4 months into the future. The Times Herald, Port Huron, Michigan, Monday, July 12th. 4 months later, March 13th, April, May, June, July 12th. Almost exactly 4 months to the day. Le Mere boy's body given up by river. The body of William, William is the father. They made a typo there when it says William. They meant Willard. Le Mere, 9-year-old who was found yesterday on the LaSalle, Ontario shore of the Detroit River, ending in a search that lasted more than 4 months. Wilfred Le Mere and Lawrence Flavin, the same age, disappeared from their homes March 9th last. The body of Flavin boy was found 2 months ago on a river shore just below Fort Wayne on May 10th. Body of missing Detroit boy found in Detroit River, the Saginaw News. The Grand Rapids Press, found body of second boy. Body of missing boy is found yesterday. The Battle Creek. Body of Le Mere boy is found. The Lansing State Journal. The body of Wilfred Le Mere, 9 years old, was found Sunday in LaSalle, Ontario, shore of the Detroit River, ending a search that lasted more than 4 months. Flavin boy was found on the river shore just below Fort Wayne on May 10th, 2 months prior. So they find one body 2 months later, and then they find my great-uncle's body 4 months later. This is the last one. The Windsor Star, page 3, Windsor, Ontario, Canada, July 12th. Find body of Le Mere lost boy. And it goes on to say they were probably drowned while playing with chum at Belle Isle. Rowing off of LaSalle early Sunday morning, Gordon Rayum and Fred Renaud discovered the body of 9-year-old Wilfred Le Mere, from whom Detroit police have been searching for the past 4 months. The boy disappeared on March 13th after possibly going to Belle Isle to play with his friend Lawrence Flavin. They failed to return home that night. Investigation begun. Police say the parents of the two boys and the parents of the two boys had also investigated. River dragged for over 2 months. A countrywide search had been conducted. Body identified. When taken out of the river at LaSalle yesterday, the body was floating by the mouth of the canal, and it was taken to Marcotte's mortuary at Sandwich, where it was identified by Frank Le Mere. Frank Le Mere was Delina's father. So that's my great-great-grandfather. Came all the way down from the Upper Peninsula, came down and went to the morgue to try to identify the body because it was so badly decomposed. It says he will be buried with his chum in Mount Elliott Cemetery Tuesday. And so sorry for any misspeaking I do. It's very hard to see a lot of these words, and they talked so differently 100 years ago. Okay, with that said, my great uncle's body was not identified by any other means than the clothing, and the body had been so badly decomposed that my great grandmother's father is the one that went to the Canadian mortuary to identify it, and from what he said, he believed it was him. We don't know, but where their bodies washed up were two totally different parts of the river, way far away, and they washed up months apart. It's my belief that they had been kidnapped the first 16 days, planes, divers, thousands of people looking at the river, watching the river, the police, the Coast Guard, the harbor masters, the local police, the state police, the Ontario police had been looking for them. They dragged the river time and time and time again those first 16 days, and they never found any sign that they had drowned. I believe they were taken, they were held, and they were later discarded. And then they were put in the river as means of to get rid of their body. And with all the other missing boys that happened in 1925 and 1926, specifically finding another little boy disposed of in the same way, just 4 days before they found on May 6th, another little boy is found and identified in the river before Lawrence Flavin was found. So here you can see where they lived was here. They would have had to walk about 12 blocks all the way to, I'm backwards here, all the way to this little bridge. They would have had to walk all the way from the movie theater, which is up here, all the way here, over a couple blocks to that bridge, come over. They think they went all the way over here somewhere and possibly got in the river, but they didn't find anything for the first 16 days. I think that if that was true, they would have found them right away. And it was probably very unlikely that in the middle of winter, March 13th of 1926, they went to a movie. I think somebody saw them, or two people saw them, took them, held them. And then later, somebody was released, and the other person was not released. And then they harmed the boys and then disposed of their body in the river, because that's not uncommon. This is Mount Elliott Cemetery in Detroit. 99 years ago, my great uncle was buried there. What was said to be my great uncle. I spoke to somebody at the cemetery. Wilfred Le Mere was buried July 13th, the day after they made identification of his body of 1926. He's in section UG, tier 1, grave 15. 2 months before that, Lawrence Flavin had been buried there in plot 14. And then 2 months later, my great uncle is found and he's buried next to him. Lawrence Flavin's father passes away December 14th of 1937, and his father is buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery. Mount Olivet Cemetery, now this is 11 years later. Mount Olivet Cemetery is where his Lawrence Flavin's father had been buried. They decide that they were going to move Lawrence Flavin to be with his father. 11 years later, they exhume his body and they move it to grave 634, lot 7, section 50. He was moved December 14th of 1937 to be next to his father. So I did not know largely for the last 100 years, neither did my grandfather, my mother, that what they believe to be my great uncle's body had been buried there alone at 9 years old for the better part of the last 100 years. And finding that out is absolutely heartbreaking and devastating at the same time. However, I'm just very blessed and very grateful that I have this, and that my mom, being one of only 2 siblings out of 7 left living and almost 73 years old now, her and I are taking a trip to the cemetery to find him. And when I do that, I will be live, or I will record it live, because I am going to find him. I know exactly where he's buried. I spoke to the person of the cemetery, and I'm going to try to restore his headstone. If there's not one, put one there, or a marker, because I believe a 9-year-old boy who was taken, ABUSED'd, unalived, and then dumped like trash, should be remembered. And I believe everybody in my family should remember him. My kids should remember him. The fact that 2 kids had to suffer and endure that is absolutely heartbreaking to me. And this is Mount Olivet Cemetery today. Lawrence Flavin and his father are in section 50. And that is Mount Elliott Cemetery. It is shaped like a huge rectangle. Section UG is up in here. He's the first row. He should be plot number 15, because Lawrence used to be plot number 14, because Lawrence was found in May and my great uncle was found in July. However, I have oftentimes wondered if there was a way that they could exhume the body to actually DNA test it to check. I don't even know if there would, the body was so badly decomposed, if there would still be bone left, if there was, any such thing like that, that they could possibly I don't know if they're able to exhume the body, if they're able to DNA test them, or if they would be able to do that. I don't know. I'm sure after 100 years, a 9-year-old that had been in the water for over 4 months, if there's bone left, I don't even know if they could retrieve DNA to DNA test it against me or my mother, because we would 100% certain match with him if that is my uncle, because there's just no way of them knowing with bodies that had been in the river that long. They just identify it based on clothes. And back then, everything was either brown, gray, black, or shades of. And so there was no way of 100% knowing. But the mind-boggling thing is how many hundreds of other little boys were kidnapped or were found laying deceased or floating in the Detroit River. We think that crime doesn't happen 100 years ago, that this didn't happen, but it happened all the time. There was PDF files out there all the time. There was people that were deviants, and they took people's lives as a way to cover up their deviance. And it's just tragic. It's tragic. But the thing that I'm the most grateful and the most blessed for is the fact that I found this, the fact that I'm able to bring closure to my mom of a story that she had no idea about, that she just thought my grandfather had 2 brothers die young, and my grandfather was never told. He was only 3 when this happened. He was born in 1923. So when this had happened, he 3 weeks prior had just had, at the end of February, by March 13th, he had just had his 3rd birthday. He wouldn't have been able to remember any of that. And then later in life, my grandfather ends up serving in the Coast Guard, where he's then discharged because he's the last of his bloodline. His brother Francis died in 1945, serving in World War II and Battle of the Bulge. And then in 1952, the Battle of Old Baldy, the Korean War, my grandfather's brother, Clifford, the fourth born, passes away in that battle. He is a first-class sergeant with the Army after spending 6 years with the Navy and then going to the Coast Guard for a year. He joins the Army, and he then is deployed to the Korean War, and he loses his life. So my grandfather is then discharged because he is the last remaining one out of the 5 brothers. And that is putting it into context the way that I have in these 2 videos. It just really shows me how beautiful and how precious life is. And evil is not just a person or a place or a thing. Evil is deeds. Evil is done by humans. And evil is perpetrated by humans. And just the thought that somebody can be so evil as to take a child's life, let alone 2 of them. And the fact that this type of evil still existed even 100 years ago blows my mind. But I am grateful, and I hope that John Lambert Ladd, the 11-year-old that was saved and found abducted the day after in Detroit on Brush Street, where Paul Harrington happened to live, and his accomplice was known to be in that area as well. I really hope that he went on to produce many children, many grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and that something good came from that legacy. I'm still diving into that a little bit myself. However, I just want to say thank you for coming on this journey and coming down this rabbit hole with me, because nobody is more amazed than I am. I do have a bonus. Now, when I do get down there to the cemetery and I bring my mom, I plan on going live or recording it for you guys, because I definitely want you guys to see. And I plan on also visiting the other cemetery where Lawrence Flavin and his father are at, where he was exhumed and moved to be with his father. I just wanted to show you this. I found another article in Montreal, the Montreal Gazette, Montreal, Quebec, Canada, page 4, Monday, November 10th, which my birthday is November 11th, 1985. But this was Monday, November 10th, 1862. I know, this is crazy. It says Port of Montreal, arrived November 7th. SCHR, I'm not sure what that stands for, as people that work on barges and ships. Pacifique Joseph Le Mieux, St. John, October 27th. D. Torrance and Company, ballast, 82 tons. Bark, G.D. Stevenson, Quebec, November 6th. G&D Shaw, Bale, 897 tons. My grandfather's father's father, Pacifique Joseph Le Mieux. He was one of 14 children. He goes on to have 10 kids and lose his wife at 38 and their 11th child given when she was given birth. He worked on barges. Him, his father, his uncle, and a couple of his brothers all worked on a lot of these barges that go up and down Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. However, I just thought that this was pretty cool that I found the Montreal Gazette from 1862 mentioning my great-great-grandfather. And there you have it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being interested. Thank you for coming down this rabbit hole with me. I love you all, and I hope you have a fantastic night. Oh, PSS. I don't know if you like reading or if you're into the book clubs or bestsellers or anything like that, memoirs. I wanted to let you know that I just got this. From Here to the Great Unknown, a memoir. Lisa Marie Presley and Riley Keough, which is her oldest daughter from her first marriage. Before she untimely passed away, Lisa Marie Presley had surpassed an age in her life where she decided she was finally going to write a memoir about herself. And I have seen that her daughter was asked to help her finish it. She was very much stuck and in the throes of her own addiction and the issues that she had living in the shadow of her father's entire life and legend. She couldn't get to a point where she could actually constructively write. So she enlists Riley, her oldest daughter, to help her do it. So Lisa decides to dictate 16 different tapes of her life to later review and go back so that the ghostwriters or editors can go back to them and actually listen to her talking about her own life from birth, all of her memories, everything, to write her own memoir outside of her dad's legacy and life. But of course, she passes away a month later, and now her daughter, instead of pretending that she was her mom and just finishing it and leaving her name off of there and doing this, she decides to actually help and put it in her own name, in her own words, where she had to fill in for her mother instead of just pretending to be her. And they finished it. So I cannot wait to start this. I'm going to let you all know what I think of it. And I know I'm a little bit late because this came out about a month ago. But yeah, if you want a good read, I heard that this is fantastic. And I will let you guys know in a few days. I just wanted to put this in as a bonus. Because if anybody else likes to read and reads a lot, please let me know what you're reading right now and what you suggest, because I'm very interested. All right, I love you all. This is it. Good night. If you want, send me all the love you can. Subscribe, like, comment, share. Stick around. Give me a chance. You might like what I have to say.